SVG, this just allows you to, similar to Font Awesome 5, one just allows you to, a really simple way of styling your SVGs. So you can, set the colors. Inside the SVG stack, you can actually set a color, but this allows you maybe to define a uniform style across all your icons on the page. As you can do some hover, effects and stuff like that, as you can with any swatch. Okay, swatches, or swatch SVGs. So I had an interesting conversation with a user on the community about SVG swatch yesterday. Maybe you saw the post. And there was a little misunderstanding, but we ultimately got to it. It was interesting. We want to check that out. And in the examples here, you'll notice that I just paste in some SVG code. And the user had put in classes inside of his SVG. And you can do that, but that's not required. There's an easier way to do this. Okay? So if you just add the class to the SVG swatch itself, okay, we'll go through all of the options here. But I just want to say that, while you can target individual things within an SVG by hand coding classes inside of it, the easiest way to do this is just add the class to the SVG stack itself, and then we can apply the swatches to it. Okay, so let's look at some of these things. Let's look at, I should have done this. Let's see, that's Svg Fill. Just so that I know what all these examples are, I'm going to put that Svg Mono. This is Svg Outline. There we go. Okay. Now this SVG swatch is actually really full featured, and we can do some really cool stuff. So let's look at this Svg Fill version first, okay? And let's see, what does that do on hover? It just changes the fill color. That's it. Pretty simple. Okay, so here we go. I have an SVG swatch, and I set the class to be Svg Fill. And in this particular thing, it all depends on your SVG that you're using. So a lot of these are going to be different depending on what your SVG is, okay? And so I had to make this swatch flexible so that we can work with any types of SVG code. Okay, so it may require a little bit of fiddling. Most of the time, setting this to be just SVG or path will work properly. So, basically what this says is, with Svg Fill, target all the paths within the SVG. So in this particular case, the app that generated this particular SVG uses paths, okay? And a lot of these paths have fill colors already defined inside of there, okay? So essentially, I would need to override all of those paths within the SVG, okay? So that's why we're going to target the paths. And I have all possible SVG things that we can target, okay? I think the default is just SVG. And again, that will work on a lot of SVGs. But if SVG isn't work, try path, and path might work, will most likely work for you. Okay, but just try a lot of these options. Again, it just depends on your SVG. It's impossible for you to know, since I have zero control over what this SVG code is, because you're just pasting it in from some app or some export or something online, right? Okay, so here I have one SVG path. I set the fill color to be purple. And here I set the pseudo state to be hover, and then I set the fill to be a different color, right? Pretty simple. And then I have a transition swatch that transitions that color so that it has that nice fade effect, right? And that's what we get here. Okay. So that's pretty simple. That just affects the fill, and as see, we can do hover animations as well. Now, you don't need to do the hover stuff, right? If you just wanted to make sure that all your icons or all your SVGs are purple, you could just have and have them statically purple. You don't need to do all the hover stuff. Okay, so at that point, you wouldn't even need this swatch or this swatch. You could just trash those, okay? And then your swatch is just permanently purple. So there, now our SVG is permanently purple, no hover animations. Okay. But now let's move on. Let's look at this Svg Mono. Okay, I thought this was kind of an interesting one. So this SVG has a bunch of colors preset, and there's a bunch of paths, and all those paths have different colors, right? So it's a more rich. It's not just a static, boring one like this purple rocket is, right? There's different colors going on in here. Okay, so what I thought would be interesting is if we look at this one. Okay, so I only have 2 swatches. So actually, by default, I'm not applying any colors or styles to this SVG. I'm just using the default SVG styles. But what I'm doing here is on SVG Mono, on path, on hover, I'm setting it to gray. So what we do is when I hover over, all those colors are changing to gray on hover. So that could be a nice, like, subtle, a subtlety where you're basically going, from something detailed when you hover over it. Maybe you're making it gray, and then you're gonna, I don't know, maybe you can show some text as well or something like that, at that point, because the more subtle color is going to be grayed out, right? So there's a bunch of tricks there, right? So we're using the colored SVG out of the box, no styling by default, and I'm only applying a swatch on hover. Okay, and then obviously we have the transition swatch to do the transition animation. Okay. Next is the SVG outline swatch. Okay, and this allows us to do some things that we haven't showed you yet, right? And that's this stroke feature. Okay, where we're applying the color, the size, the dash, and we could also do caps, right? Which is essentially SVG says the end of our line, is it going to be rounded? Is it going to be dashed? Is it going to be squared off? So all kinds of stuff, right? Some interesting stuff. So this allows us to apply, here I'm applying a transparent fill so that it's going to be transparent. And then I am then applying, colored dashes. And you can apply, you can change the width of those and all kinds of stuff. And what am I doing on there? Oh, here I'm applying, and then basically on hover, I'm doing, I'm applying the fill to it. Okay, so pretty interesting. And then I'm changing the size of the border to be 0. So there we go. Some fun stuff with SVGs. I think the possibilities here are very interesting. We can do some very intriguing stuff by manipulating our SVG colors and whatnot with a swatch.